Hello everyone, I'm George from Ireland, and here I am outside the former station of the London Necropolis Railway. You can see it behind me across the street. This is Westminster Bridge Road Street. So the curious career of the London Necropolis Railway commenced in the year of grace, some 1800s, 4 and 50, because the graveyards of London town were filling up after centuries, and there simply wasn't enough room to inter the deceased, and the cadavers were infecting the water supply, were outbreaks of cholera and such like. So what was to be done? Well, 7 new cemeteries were set up, such as West Brompton and so on. I think Kensal Green had been inaugurated a few years earlier, but they thought they needed a large cemetery, a sufficient distance from London, but with still such proximity that people could easily go there, bury their relatives and return at the same day, that they could easily visit the last resting place of the dear departed in future. And most of the United Kingdom was to the west of London, well, even more to the north, so it's going to be to the west, not to the east. This problem had occurred before, during the plague of 1666, the Black Death, when bubonic plague broke out, when all the cemeteries were absolutely chock full of corpses, and they'd had to go out into Kent, carrying the bodies by cart further and further into Kent, till the last place they buried people when the plague ended was called Gravesend. That's why there's the name of that town. But that's to the southeast. This is to the southwest. So they happened upon Brookwood, which I think is just in Surrey, very close to the border with Hampshire. These are English counties. Now the English, they started messing up their county boundaries in 1973, and they've never stopped chopping and changing them. Anyway, so the London Necropolis Railway Station was not originally here. It was at Leek Street, which you can't see from this site, which is a bit further that way. You see that bridge? That bridge is a bit of the railway from London Waterloo. London Waterloo is that away. I see the train going over it now, and the Leek Street site was launched and lasted to 1902. It was then demolished. There's nothing of it left. It's been built on since. Anyway, I'm not quite sure why they weren't happy with that one. There was all sorts of spirited debate. Was it really right to transport bodies by rail? The Bishop of London thought that it wasn't sufficiently dignified. Anyway, but eventually it was decided for practical reasons that it had to be. Sometimes they were transported by river to this point. A couple of other stations used for this purpose elsewhere in the United Kingdom. Anyhow, so from 1902, this was the station, London Necropolis Railway. You might see the year up high is 1900, but they didn't actually start using it properly until 1902. So there were 2 different waiting rooms, because it's a very, very class stratified society, and you paid for what you got, and those are obviously the higher socioeconomic stratum paid more and could travel with the casket containing their relative, and then the bereaved could travel to the cemetery. And obviously those in the lower social economic tier had a different waiting room, different carriages going with the coffins likewise. Now Brookwood is divided into an Anglican and a non-conformist section. By non-conformist they meant Protestants outside the Church of England, so that meant Baptists, Quakers, Presbyterians, Congregationalists, the Disciples of Christ, Plymouth Brethren and such like. Now, there were not that many Catholics in England in 1854. There's no Catholic section of it. Now, of course, you can be any religion buried there, certainly these days, and there are Muslims, and there's a Zoroastrian section, fascinating, which I filmed in another video, because, of course, Zoroastrians or Parsis, they're often known, are supposed to be put in dakhma, as in towers of silence, to be gobbled by birds of prey. But that's not permissible in this realm. They have to be either committed to the earth or indeed to the flames. But either would be sacrilege to the Parsis, who are often known by the misnomer fire worshippers, but they consider burning the corpse worse. So they said, well, we're just going to have to put them into the earth. Anyway, so it's not a very long journey. It's not even an hour from Waterloo to Brookwood. Obviously, it would have been longer in 1854. And there were, from Brookwood Station, the train carried on, the funeral train. Obviously, most trains stop at Brookwood for passengers are going to the town of Brookwood or just carrying on into Hampshire. But for the funeral train, it would either go to the North Station, the South Station. The North Station, closer to the main railway line, was for non-conformists, and the South Station for Anglicans. That's to say, communicants of the Church of England. and it carried on like that till 1941. Then there was a bomb which damaged much of their station. The last usage of this station for a funeral train was on the 11th of April 1841 for Mr. Irish, a Chelsea pensioner. That's to say, he was a former soldier of the British Army who'd been living in the Royal Hospital Chelsea. It's not actually a hospital, the Royal Hospital Chelsea. It's a retirement home for ex-military personnel. It still exists. They're known as Chelsea pensioners. You see them going around in their blue or red rig, depending on the time of year. Red in the summer, blue is their winter dress uniform with the letters RH as in Royal Hospital. They've got a real fabulous location. Must be worth an absolute fortune. They could obviously move them out, sell it off, rent it out for other purposes, and have loads of money for a purpose-built or more modern purpose-built, sensible retirement home, but that's not been done. Anyway, so the usage of this line was discontinued in 1941. After the Second World War, they considered bringing it back, but the line in Brookwood had not been maintained, had rather deteriorated, so they chose not to do so. So you can go to Brookwood Cemetery, as I've been, and you can see a tiny portion of the line which is still extant, and obviously not in use, just to show you where it was. One of the stations has been demolished, another's been converted into an Orthodox cemetery, and Brookwood, one of the Anglo-Saxon kings of this kingdom, is laid to rest there, was put there a millennium ago, but it's obviously not till 1854 it became a cemetery on any large scale. At one point it's the largest cemetery in the world. Some American personnel who were killed in the Second World War were buried there, as indeed were about 20 American soldiers executed by the US Army at Shepton Mallet here in the United Kingdom, executed by hanging for murder, rape and other offences. They were buried in a special dishonoured section. But they've since been exhumed and reburied somewhere else in France, I think, in a US military cemetery. I don't know why they couldn't leave them be, why they went to the trouble and expense of re-interring them elsewhere. So that is all that remains of the London Necropolis Railway. I thought I could go closer if it's safe and look in through those bars where they used to walk. And I don't know what on earth that's used for these days. It says no parking. I'll hurry across. So what a fascinating phenomenon. I've always found these things scintillating, these quirks of history. That's the thing about me being hypermnesic and hyperthymesic, is I've got this weakness for lost causes and vanished worlds. Okay, transmarine shipping agencies. So I used to go in here, walk in here, horse-drawn carriage in here, perhaps, and then in towards that way would connect to the railway station, the main railway line. So that's it, quite high up, because we're very much into waiting rooms, a different class of waiting rooms. Often there were 3 classes of railways back in those days. Nowadays there's only first class and standard class. So obviously most people go standard class, about a third of the price. And that must be part of it as well. Also, I don't know how much of the original building. Okay, that's enough from me. I hope you found this utterly enthralling. I might return to Brookwood one of these days and film what remains of it there. So please follow me on Instagram, on Facebook, on Twitter, and book online lessons with me. Book me as your tour guide in Londinium. Another thing is I urgently need donations to keep this channel going. So you can donate to me on PayPal, georgecallahan79@gmail.com. Callahan is spelled C-A-L-L-A-G-H-A-N. It's all small letters. Thank you so much. So, toodle pip from London town.